This next story is about a young veterinarian and a very sick dog who had less than a day to live. There was only one thing that could help the bulldog named Brindle, an unexpected gift that arrived in the nick of time. Dr. Betsy Hutchins was thrilled when she joined Northgate Pet Clinic in Decatur, Illinois. She worked well with the head of the clinic, Dr. Larry Baker, even though their personalities were very different.
Dr. Hutchins tends to be a pessimist. I tend to be an optimist.
I'm a pretty pessimistic person, and I always think the worst. I always think the worst is going to happen.
One Saturday afternoon, the pessimist found herself the only vet on duty at the clinic. She was just waiting for something to go wrong.
It was my first year in practice, so I was a fresh grad. Very nervous to be at the clinic by myself.
Then, a patient arrived, a bulldog named Brindle, who belonged to the clinic's secretary and her husband.
Just a sweet, lovable bulldog, big teddy bear. We decided to take Brindle to the vet because for a day or two before she was having fainting spells.
Dr. Hutchins discovered that the electrical system in Brindle's heart had malfunctioned, causing a very rare condition called third-degree heart block.
And so she wasn't getting enough oxygen to her brain, which made her faint and can cause tissue problems and brain problems.
A bulldog's normal heart rate is between 90 and 100 beats per minute. Brindle's was 19. She was dying. Dr. Hutchins knew there was only one thing that could save her, and the clinic didn't have it.
And I just put my head in my hands and thought, oh no. And the owner said, well, what does she need? What's gonna help her? What do we need to do for Brindle? And I said, well, she needs a pacemaker installed. And the look on their face, a pacemaker? What do you mean a pacemaker?
Out of 68 million dogs in the U.S., only 200 get pacemakers every year. Brindle would have to be one of those dogs. But where could they possibly find her a pacemaker in time?
When I heard that Brindle's only chance of survival was to get a pacemaker, 2:30 on a Saturday afternoon, I knew the chances were very, very slim. We were about to lose a dog.
So I don't know what we're gonna do. And the receptionist at the same time was standing there, said, well, what about the pacemaker on Dr. Baker's desk? And I said, what pacemaker?
2 weeks earlier, Dr. Baker had received a call. A man named Chuck Barr had just died, and his widow didn't want her husband's pacemaker to go to waste.
The pacemaker should be saved for something because it was so expensive to start with, and it was only about 3 years old.
Although a second-hand pacemaker can't legally be implanted in another human being, Chuck's brother had an idea.
And he said, why don't you give it to Dr. Baker and let him use it for a dog?
Frankly, Dr. Baker didn't think he'd ever need the pacemaker, but he wanted to be polite.
So sure, I said, bring it on in. I'd like to have it. That'd be nice.
And so, one Saturday morning, a used pacemaker in a brown paper bag was dropped off on Dr. Baker's desk just 3 hours before Brindle came into the clinic.
At that point, I was just standing there and just got goosebumps. And so from then on, I called Dr. Baker.
She just simply said, Larry, is that a pacemaker on your desk? And I said, yes, I'm sure it is. She said, we need it. We've got a dog in third-degree heart failure. I said, you're kidding. That's a rather rare condition in dogs. Perhaps I've seen it once before in 35 years.
When Dr. Baker got to the clinic, he saw that Brindle's life was hanging by a thread.
Her heart rate was getting slower and slower, so I would imagine her lifespan would be limited to 7 or 8 hours, and that would probably be it.
He said, let's do the surgery tonight. What are you waiting for?
There was no time to lose, but there were big risks involved.
Implanting a pacemaker is a pretty tricky surgery, considering it's the first time Dr. Hutchins and I ever did it together. It was kind of touch and go during the surgery because we don't, frankly, open the chest very much. We're not thoracic surgeons.
I was not convinced at all that the surgery would be a success.
But once again, luck was on their side. In school, Dr. Hutchins had actually performed chest surgeries on animals, something most vets in training never get to do.
I think the chances of a veterinarian having that experience when they first get out of school are pretty remote. Maybe 1 or 2 in the nation probably have done thoracic surgery when they get out of school.
After 2.5 tense, difficult hours, the pacemaker was successfully installed.
We set it for 100 beats per minute. So she went from 19 to 100. The heart started beating, and it just went from like bump, bump, to bump, 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 and everybody cheered.
Third day, we opened a crate and she bolted out, just like nothing was going on. Ran down the steps, ran outside, and my wife and I looked at each other and said, this is not the same bulldog. It's gonna be okay.
The clinic threw Brendel a party. The guest of honor was Carolyn Barr.
Brendel had a little corsage, and I shook hands with Brendel, and there was a lovely cake, so we had a nice party.
If we didn't have Mrs. Barr's donation of the pacemaker, I suspect that Brendel would not have survived the night.
I don't think I'll ever have another case like this, like Brendel. It was like a dream. I couldn't believe that everything fell into place like it did.
Chuck would have said that was the thing to do. He loved dogs, and anything that could be done for a dog to save its life would have made him very happy.
We all know that organ donations have saved countless lives, but when one Decatur, Illinois man died earlier this year, his wife donated something else that has proven to be a lifesaver for a very unlikely recipient. Here's Scott Rappaport.
Carolyn and Chuck Barr were married for 30 years, and there was only one thing that Chuck loved more than dogs, his family.
He was a very good husband, and he was a very good father, and he loved his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren.
So when Chuck passed away last month, Carolyn had an idea to help someone that could even save a life. And miraculously, at a nearby clinic, there was a patient desperately in need.
We ran the ECG and found that she had complete heart block.
But this was no ordinary clinic, and certainly no ordinary patient. Brendel is a 10-year-old bulldog, and when she fainted last weekend, her owner, Terry Hinton, brought her to the Northgate Pet Clinic, where she works as a receptionist. The prognosis was grim.
If she didn't have a pacemaker, she probably wouldn't make it through the weekend.
In an amazing twist of fate, the way Carolyn Barr had chosen to help someone was by giving her late husband's pacemaker to Dr. Larry Baker at the Northgate Pet Clinic. Miraculously, it arrived the morning of Brendel's diagnosis.
It's the first time we've needed a pacemaker in over 15 years, and it showed up the same day we needed it.
But the real ordeal had just begun.
We just said goodbye. I held her while they shaved her, prepped her for surgery. That was the scariest part with a weak heart, if she would come out of surgery. So we had made the decision that if, in starting the surgery, if she starts to go, then we'll bring her back out and let nature take its course.
But Brendel pulled through just fine. The pacemaker was successfully implanted in her chest, and now her prognosis is great.
Her x-rays are looking better, the fluid's going down from around her lungs, and we look for a full recovery.
Yeah, you do. So much. You're welcome.
Last week, we were there when Carolyn met Brendel and the Hintons for the first time at a celebration thrown for Brendel.
It says, Brendel says thanks to the Barr family.
Isn't that nice?
But as happy as the occasion made Carolyn, earlier in the day, she recalled a conversation she had with one of Chuck's daughters.
His daughter said last night on the phone that Dad would be up in heaven smiling down at us because he would be so happy about it.
Now, if you're wondering why Carolyn Barr donated her husband's pacemaker to the animal clinic in the first place, it's because the FDA won't allow pacemakers to be reused by humans in America. However, they can be used by animals.